Hello, I'm Susan King, the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at UNC Chapel Hill, and with me is Clark Bell, Head of Journalism for the McCormick Foundation. Welcome to Chapel Hill.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And we're glad to have you on campus. And what brings you to campus is, of course, a conference on sex trafficking, supported by you and put on really by the Poynter Institute to really bring journalists up to speed on a very difficult issue.
Yes. We've been doing specialized reporting institutes with Poynter for the last 6 years. We do 6 each year on timely, compelling news topics. Could be veterans issues, immigration issues, social justice issues. And we get about 50 applications from universities wanting to put these on. When we saw this sex trafficking application, we said, this is a hot button that needs to be pushed.
And what was it about it? Undercovered story, a serious story that was difficult to tell? What was it that you saw about it that was unique?
We see a global issue that's becoming local. And it's not just a big city issue. It's in the small towns. It's in the small cities. It's a pipeline story. It's an economic story. But it touches all of us in some way, somehow.
And so much of journalism is in, disruption mode. Are you finding some issues just not getting the attention that they would have at another time when finances were better?
Well, no doubt about it. And the toughest part is to get the type of reporters we want to come to these trainings. They feel guilty if they have to leave their staffs for 3 days. Somebody else is going to have to do the work. But to do quality journalism in a specialized topic, you need this quiet time, this study time, this reflective time, this research time. We feel that coming together as a group of 20, 25 journalists really is the payoff. And then later we do webinars and do digital multipliers, but we feel to have this core base is really a good way to approach the topic.
And of course, I'm proud of our professors, Dr. Friedman and Dr. Johnson, have been researching this for many years. Did that also have a compellingness, that there was research and scholarship behind the idea?
Well, certainly in human trafficking, it becomes a human issue, and it's so easy just to tell that side of the story. To make it relevant, you have to put it in perspective. To do perspective, you have to have statistics and research. And the ladies at UNC have been doing this for years, as you mentioned. They have good baseline data, they have good comparative data, and I think without that, we may have gone a different direction, but this solidified and cemented our approach to working with UNC.
Talk a little bit about the idea of scholars, the educators, the academics, and their relationship to journalism. As a foundation, you get to see these two sides. Sure. I used to be in the foundation world. Now I got to walk the walk if right. I used to be talking the talk. But there is a unique role. Sometimes people don't trust the scholars, and the scholars really, in a way, want to inform or maybe persuade the practitioners. How do you see it?
Well, I think there's a healthy tension between the two, and well, there should be. I think there's always room for scholars on the research side, on the ethical side, on the practice side, the study of journalism, the study of communication. But I think in today's world, with the digital technology advances and the specialized type of reporting and the entrepreneurial sense of what goes on in our field, that there is room for more than PhDs at the academy. What we need is that healthy balance as well as the healthy tension.
You've just described what I hope is the relationship here in this school. Talk a little bit about the foundation, which of course is rooted in journalism. Yes. Many foundations are not and may dabble in journalism, support. But McCormick at its very root was a media organization. So how do you see your relationship to the field of journalism, which is in such a moment of change?
Sure. Robert R. McCormick was the longtime editor and publisher of the Chicago Tribune. He was really the first person to do multimedia. We had radio and television stations and newspapers and other market. He was the first one to do color comics. He really financed First Amendment type stuff. He was a staunch advocate of the First Amendment. And then, of course, his family was very tight with the Medill family, which founded the Medill School of Journalism. So the journalism tradition is all about the McCormick Foundation. He died in 1955, left $50 million that later turned into a $2.5 billion foundation. We're down to about 1.5 now. The journalism program is a traditional source of funding for the foundation. We've had a individual journalism program for 20 years and have done $120 million in the field of journalism funding.
And what do you see as a foundation that's your mandate at this time, where in the olden days journalism was making a lot of money, and so it didn't need a foundation to really be a catalyst for change or support? Now people are looking to foundations for support.
Yeah, in the past we did the First Amendment programs, but we did a lot of leadership and management, getting people who would take over these big profit-making organizations and make sure they had at least editorial kind of backgrounds and framework. Today, it's all about growing an audience, it's about news literacy, it's about education and training in a new field. So we've changed our scope of focus, and I think that most of the foundations that do active journalism work have gone down that route. There aren't many of us. I mean, the Knight Foundation is by far the biggest journalism funder, but then when you get to pure journalism funding, McCormick, Ethics and Excellence, Ford Foundation to a certain extent, but there aren't many of us. We do $6 million a year. I think Knight does $35 to $40 million a year. So it's a small field, but one that is growing in the sense that people are doing media grant making, but it's more on the advocacy side, that Robert Wood Johnson will do journalism funding and make documentaries about health issues. So you see a lot of that, but as far as the actual covering of news and the field of journalism, it's a very small field.
And so what kind of impact can you make at that? I mean, there was a point where some people said, could foundations take over newspapers in a community? Could they run a national newspaper? And then folks decided there wasn't enough money to do that. So,
well, Poynter actually, is a foundation that ran the St. Pete Times. That was kind of interlocking. I think that's not our role. And at any foundation, as you well know, Susan, you have priorities and you have funding guidelines, and they're very strategic. They're evaluative. They have to measure impact and make a difference. So the three areas that we're doing currently are news literacy, which we feel is important in the schools, whether it's college or middle school. We think it is the information skills for the 21st century. That's our definition of news literacy. We also do education and training, and that could be anything from high school journalism programs to mid-career trainings like this. And then our third area is going beyond press freedoms and beyond First Amendment defense. It's more about accountability and transparency in government. So we're using the press freedoms and First Amendment as a launching point to try to do our bit to make sure that government is responsible and accountable.
and in this internet age, public documents ought to be more available. So it's really challenging that kind of
But there are a lot of data dumping going on. There's big data. There are a lot of information out there, but we don't have as many journalists to put it in perspective. And especially when you get to, say, covering state houses, you're seeing a lot of material about funding of programs and pensions and so forth, but there really isn't the journalistic firepower there once was. So big data doesn't necessarily mean good government.
or good understanding.
Correct.
And do you, there's been a movement afoot to nonprofit folks fill some of those gaps, particularly in communities. There was one that was of promise in Chicago for a while. Some of those have fallen apart. What is your sort of thoughts about nonprofit journalism? Is that a saving grace for the future, or is it a blip?
Well, we're talking mostly on the local end. There have always been kind of national organizations that have a foundation model, the Center for Public Integrity, Center for Investigative Reporting, Mother Jones, those types. But really, as newsrooms and newspapers began downsizing, you saw a real shortage of good quality local reporting. So many of these communities had a reporter or two who really got the entrepreneurial spirit, got maybe a foundation grant behind the cause, and started doing these local news outlets, so to speak. Some have been successful, others are not. It's mostly about sustainability and then impact. Those are the biggest challenges. I believe that the universities can play a major role in sustaining these organizations. And I think if you have deep-rooted, meaningful beneficial partnerships between the universities and the local news organizations, some of the nonprofits in town, the professors who do the research, the professional media organizations, that you can thoroughly and competently cover a local community. But a couple of people who are former newspaper reporters are going to have a difficult time doing it on their own.
Because they don't have the resources.
Exactly. It's all a matter of dollars and cents.
Now, the kind of thing you described, is that what people are talking about in your mind as to the hospital model, where students become residents and actually work within the hospitals? Are you seeing students become something and working in news organizations, or as part of their education being just sort of an additive to the process?
Well, two things. First of all, a number of our foundations have come together in the last couple of weeks and announced $1 million innovation fund in journalism education that hopefully feeds into this teaching model. So it'll be McCormick, the Knight Foundation, Ethics and Excellence, and Omidyar, which is the American Democracy Fund. We hope to add other funders later, but we're looking for spirited entrepreneurial digital ideas that really help cover the community. Let's go back to that teaching hospital reference. I was once the editor of the leading healthcare business magazine, so I covered teaching hospitals. I know them intimately, and what do? They train students, they give patient care, they have public clinics, they do the research, they're well managed, they're part of the social and scientific fabric of not only their communities, but of their states and countries. And we feel that that model carries over. It's not a replica, but it carries over, has the same types of tentacles, teaching hospitals, journalism education. So it's one that kind of slaps people in the face because we're not teaching hospitals. But if you look at what a teaching hospital does, a good, forward-thinking, innovative journalism school is going to be doing many of the same things.
And what's the biggest goal in something like that? To give students great experience, to fill the news hole, the gap that exists at this sort of moment, or to really help news organizations in this difficult time?
It's simply yes, yes, and yes. I mean, we're doing a model in Chicago, for instance, where it's on social justice issues, and we'll take 12 community journalists. They will be assigned a full-time graduate student at Medill to work with them on their topic and get multimedia skills training from the Medill professors. So I think, and they also get a stipend. Their community coverage, we think, will be better. We think the students will get a firsthand experience. Northwestern has more of a stamp and a signature program in Chicago where it wants to do most work. And then hopefully the audience and the community is better served by having better knowledge.
So the great thing about Northwestern is has you, a Chicago-based foundation that cares. The other thing it has is their dean is our PhD grad.
All right.
So we can brag about Brad.
These North Carolina people are everywhere, believe me, everywhere I go.
Well, he's a great colleague, but we're real proud of him at the same time. Just to sum up in a way, you have done everything in the news business yourself. I mean, you've done the specialty magazines, you've worked in a number of newspapers, you've had the privilege of really funding journalism ideas at a time of incredible change. Where are you on the scale? You optimistic about the future?
Well, first of all, personally, I knew I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 14 years old. I started out as a copy boy at the Chicago Daily News right out of high school, and then I did internships and did many interesting professional things, only because all along the way there were people there to counsel me, to mentor me, to help me, to give me the opportunity. And I see my role as just giving people the chance to have at least one time at bat, to have an opportunity to get involved in these type of journalistic endeavors if they have the ability and the drive to do it. So that's my role. Where do I come down? I think that society needs journalism and good news organizations more so than ever. We're living in a very complex, global-driven society, yet the local community is still where we make our living, we live, we raise our children, and I don't think we can lose sight of the importance of covering local news.
And community journalism has a great history in this state, and we feel at least, though the times are tough, that the community cares so much that they may be more stable than those who don't have defined communities.
You know, I look at your students today, and probably 20 years from now, half of them will be working in a profession we've never even heard of. That's how rapidly things are changing.
And that's why you're optimistic?
Yes, ma'am.
Because journalism, of course, is the best profession in the world.
Well, but it's also protects society. I mean, we can talk about the high and mighty democracy and our role in it because it's true.
Clark Bell, I'm not topping that. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Susan.